Hey, welcome, My Ground Force customers and friends. Tim's Goff here, CEO and founder of My Ground Force, and your host for the new exciting podcast, Taking Care of Business. Man, I'm really excited today to host my friend and former CFO of a large linehaul contractor, now out on his own as CEO of Sperova Inc., my friend Wayne Scott. Wayne, welcome to Taking Care of Business podcast.
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, it's extremely important, and one of the things I talk to folks about all the time is business is 80% what I call blocking and tackling. And one of the most important things you have to do is you got to master the numbers. You got to be on the numbers. And this is pretty much the whole reason for My Ground Force coming into existence, is the ability for a business owner in this space to have ready access to the kind of analysis that we can do using state-of-the-art AI technology, and most of that you can't do on your own, but without devoting internal resources to doing it. So you get probably better data than you could get crunching Excel, but you just show up and the numbers are pushed to you, and then you can make decisions, right? But the most important thing is, let's go back and let's talk about what those numbers are. So, man, given your credentials and your background, why don't you just take us through this course, the 80% blocking and tackling as it pertains to managing the finances and essentially the company's future from a financial perspective in a service provider company.
Yeah, that's right. If you were to cut to the quick of the issue that when I talk to FedEx contractors, the number one thing that I keep hearing is cash is king, right? And I think that that's true. The beauty about FedEx from a cash standpoint, it's one of those rare business models where you get paid literally every week. And so there's no delay on the cash coming in. I think where we see the challenges relates to how the cash goes out, right? So you've got the cash inflow that's predictable, but you've got this other side of the cash flying out of the bank account, and I think that's where most owners that I talk to are needing help, right? They want to keep more of that cash in the bank, or at least in their pocket. And I try to make it simple for them because, these contractors, they've got so many balls in the air at one time. And I tell them, it's like, look, there are three things I really want you to focus on: daily and weekly KPIs, monthly financial reporting, and annual or quarterly budgets. And I've seen that when they get these three disciplines in place, they learn quickly on how to keep more of that cash in their bank account.
Yeah, it's really sage advice. And my experience in coaching contractors or service providers is that's the shot group that has all three of those disciplines functioning in their company is far short of the total number. So the infrastructure that's required to be able to deliver on what you just talked about is absolutely key. Talk to us about that infrastructure. And one of the things that I built into My Ground Force is the fact that you can normalize the numbers over the periods of time, right? Be it week over week, month over month, quarterly over, because then the numbers mean something. Talk to us about that infrastructure and how to get numbers that mean something.
You bet. So you talk about infrastructure, it's literally everything, right? So if you don't have systems that will create these KPIs for you, you just won't do it on your own. It takes too much manual labor. It takes too much manual labor for that to be done when they've got so many other things to do. And so I think having systems that do this reporting to understand which KPIs you should be looking at, right? And I would say that for FedEx contractors, most of their KPIs are going to be done weekly. You get your settlement sheets on Wednesday. that one event triggers just about every other measurement that we're going to look at. But if you think about this, if you're independent contractor, do you know KPIs like what is your line haul revenue per mile? What is your gross profit per mile? What is operating profit per mile? Do you even know how to measure operating profit? And then another one that I really try to get people to focus in on is this concept of EBITDA, which is spelled IBITDA. So that is looking at a measurement from an investment world that says, hey, what's the worth of your company? And they use EBITDA to measure that. So I really try to get owners to hone in on that, because at some point you think they're going to want to sell their business. Are they thinking about that years in advance so that they know what that EBITDA number ought to be, and what should it be on a per mile basis? And like you said, Tim, the key here is the frequency of which you measure this. And so weekly would be because the settlement sheets come out weekly, but then you also want to look at it monthly, quarterly, and annually. And as you build up the KPI, you'll start to see trends where perhaps your fuel cost per mile may be edging up, and you need to know that that's happening. You know, if you look at just total dollars of fuel, those numbers are so big typically they don't mean anything. But when you look at it on a per mile basis, all of a sudden you're dialing into something that's really, really meaningful. You know, as far as KPIs, I tell people that they need to look at the basic financial structure of a P&L on a per mile basis. And that would include everything from revenue that we've already talked about to the supplemental fuel revenue that you get from FedEx. You know, how is that charting week over week? Are you actually getting paid your supplemental fuel? You know, that's another one that can slip by people quickly. And if I remember correctly, Tim, your system tracks that pretty well. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, we look for those revenue leaks, right? I mean, I consider the CEO of these companies, most of them are relatively small, right? So I used to say, as the CEO, I'm the revenue assurance officer. My job is to make sure I'm getting paid every penny I'm owed, and because I'm not profitable enough to give it back to FedEx. So then you have to, first of all, realize that. I am shocked, honestly, sometimes by the number of service providers that don't even know they're missing fuel surcharge or even what is the settlement adjustments process. So what you're talking about is implementing an infrastructure of oversight of the key fundamentals of your company. And I try to help people understand being in this business is more than having trucks and drivers, because you can run right out of cash and having all the trucks and drivers that you need to have and go right out of business. You know, we added this, and I know you're a big fan of this this chart that we have in the system we call net profitability per mile. What is your net fuel cost per mile? Every time the wheel rolls a mile, what happened? Is it red or green? Right? Yep. And that's what, you know, guys like you who are running big organizations or coaching guys that are running big organizations, we do red, yellow, green, right? We don't spend any time on something that's green. We look at the red because those are the opportunities. And because we get numbers every week, it's hard to overvalue that capability. I mean, when I was running, you know, corporate divisions, I was lucky to get good numbers once a quarter. And so when you're navigating along, right, you're not getting the kind of numbers you really want. You kind of have a feel. You might be doing some gut checks along the way. But in the FedEx business, you get a gut check every week. That's right. You can pull your lever and see what happens a week or so from now. You'll know if it worked. I mean, that's a huge advantage, but you have to take advantage of that advantage, shall we say.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, it's interesting how you talk about, we focus on the red, right? And obviously you want to go there first. But I'm quick to tell these owners, like, hey, be sure to celebrate the wins too, right?
Yeah.
I find them all quickly run into the red. And as you said, we should watch that because that's the leakage. And yet at the same time, I have found there to be just as much importance of celebrating the wins and the victories, no matter how big or how small in the month, because those are important too. And one of the things that I've learned or seen or experienced is that a lot of these contractors, they're doing this alone, right? And so from an emotional standpoint, it's a heavy burden for them. And when we do our monthly financial reviews, I really try to circle just as many positive points in the data as I do the areas that we want to work on. I know it's a little bit of a dirt road from what you were talking about, but I think there's some value to that.
Well, I think there ought to be a sign on that dirt road because that's extremely important. I was that guy, right?
Yeah.
I was that guy, and it was a lonely place to be because you're the only one with all your chips in the center of the table. And your decisions are having a direct impact on a lot of people, but especially you. And what I try to help people understand, we believe we're differentiating at My Ground Force in many ways, but this data, it should be important to you. It's not how much you're paying for it and you don't really need it. You need to know it because you're the number one investor in your company. And
That's
so
right.
you need to know what kind of result. You're the shareholder. What are you doing for your shareholders?
Yep.
You need to think about it like that. And, you just said something that I want to go back to. I did this podcast I'll call The Profit Chain. And it's kind of a combination of all the things I've learned over the course of time. And we talk about that everything you do in your company is its own profit chain, and then it contributes to the company's overall profit chain. And so you have to see how you do everything in your company as a profit chain. And are you doing it the most efficiently? And are you getting the return on the money that you're putting into it? And one of the things I say in that podcast is you need to learn how to see your business the way the market sees your business. And there ain't a lot of people that think about it like that every day when you're getting FedEx calling you with this and drivers calling you with that. But at the end of the day, the real value in these businesses is on the exit. And therefore, you need to be managing with that in mind and learn how to see how the market sees your business and then manage your business like that. You talked about EBITDA. When I first came into this, I'm a big corporate guy, and I kept asking that number. And I think people thought I was calling them names. I think they were ready to fight. Not too many people had heard that term before, right? But it's key.
Yeah.
And you have to really understand what the true definition of it is. Maybe some of these brokers out there have different definitions of it that might be self-serving to some degree. But there is a accounting GAAP-approved definition of what that number is, and that's the number you need to know as an owner.
That's right. And that's exactly right. And I would just to add to that, do they know that number day in and day out? When they meet people and they ask, well, how do you know if you're doing a great job or not? And if they're not thinking in terms of EBITDA, or a measurement that tells them from a cash flow perspective that they're positive, right? Then they don't know. And as you said, it's just it's a vital statistic. It's like taking your heart rate. It's just one of the most vital measurements that you can have, and it's just something that needs to be looked at. Which if you think about the three parts that I said to look at, the second one is in fact looking at your financials on a monthly basis. There's 12 months. If we're not having 12 meetings just to look at financials, then you are flying blind as an owner. And literally, if you put a handkerchief over your eyes and got in a truck and started driving, that's how you should feel if you're not having those monthly financial reporting meetings with your CFO or with someone who's taking care of those numbers for you. I think that if you what I've seen is that a lot of owners, they either don't feel comfortable reading a P&L, profit and loss statement, or they're scared what it might say that they're doing wrong. And I really try to paint a different picture there. I actually want them to get excited about the failures that we find in their reporting, which is so counterintuitive when you think about an owner. It's like, no, I don't want to see any of my failures. And I'm like, well, look at it differently, that if you're not failing, that means you're not learning, right? Little kids fail all day long, and it doesn't slow them down at all from getting back up off the ground when they fall down and start running again. And I think as owners, we need to take on that mindset of, hey, let's not beat ourselves up because of the financials, but let's just own where we are and then decide, where do we go from here? I think there's two parts that are important here. One, you want to have your financials reported on no later than mid-month of the next month. So ideally around the 15th of the month, you want to be able to sit down and review those numbers in detail. Number two, there might be 20 things on those financials that need fixing. Do not try to fix 20 items. Only find the top 3 items that you need to work on. Again, there may be more than that, but what I've seen is if you can get an owner to focus just on 3 items a month, times 12, that's a lot of change in a positive way for any set of financials over the course of a year.
There's some powerful words there. Using the Pareto Principle is fundamental to managing big businesses, and it's not talked about enough in this business, right? Because there are key drivers, and you got to pay attention to them. And oftentimes, there's more than one thing to look at. For instance, in managing fuel to its best optimized place, it's not just one thing. You might work on this thing, and when you come, because it's a big number, and you come back around, okay, there's 4 or 5 things in fuel I need to look at. Let's look at this one. Let's get that one under control. And what I had to try to help people understand sometimes, Wayne, is fixing it doesn't mean telling somebody to do something. It is, okay, what is it? How is it generated? What is my process to control it? What is my metric to measure if I'm controlling it? And how often am I going to monitor it to ensure it remains controlled? I just had a conversation with a good customer. Well, they're all good customers, but in particular, this guy 2 weeks ago. And we'd had a business review 6 months ago, and he says, hey, Tim, I'm struggling with a little bit with fuel again. And so we get back on the call, and we had the same conversation. What he fixed 6 months ago was no longer fixed, and he didn't see it. So there's a couple things there that need to get corrected, right? We need to go back and look at this behavior. It's one of the things about my ground force that I love. You can see the behavior weekly.
Yes.
If it changed, it shows up. And I went back and said, here is where you made the decision. Look what happened. This thing got better for like 12 straight weeks. And then it started trending back. That's just drivers being drivers. So you got to remind them on how you expect them to behave and hold them accountable. And so this is how you leverage, if you were doing a true weekly assessment of your business according to a discipline that you're not just breezing through this number, that number, but having essentially an agenda, if you will. Every week I'm going to go through these 25 things, and I'm going to see where I am, and are they trending up or down or whatever it is. And then, Wayne's told me I'm going to fix 3 this month. Okay, well, it's easy to find 3 the first month. Those aren't hard to find, right? The next month, hopefully, it's a little bit harder to find 3. And,
that's right.
That's
right.
You
bring up a key point there, Tim, that I think is worthy of almost repeating, and that is this, that you can fix something, and months later, all of a sudden, the fix is no longer working, right? And if you don't have these systems in place to monitor it, it could literally go on for another 6 months before you actually realize, oh my gosh, I've had all this leakage of revenue, and I should have caught it 6 months ago, right?
Yeah,
So I
like not
think what
getting
you're
paid
bringing
your
up
fuel
there is
surcharge,
critical.
right? Sorry about that. I stepped on you, Wayne, but like not getting paid your fuel surcharge. You can fix that this week and go a month without it, and then everybody thinks it's good. And then at the end of the year, Wayne looks at your books and said, I thought we fixed this. Well, you did for a couple months, and then no one was looking at it after that, right?
Well, and that particular measurement is something you just cannot let go of weekly. It has legs of its own, and it will. I can assure you, FedEx does not want to pay you something if you're not doing the proper reporting to get reimbursed for it. And so it's really up to us as owners to make sure that happens. And supplemental fuel revenue, it is literally a baby that you've got to nurse weekly, or it will just crawl away from you.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. If you're a solo contractor, you might be averaging $1.50 a mile prior to fuel, and then you might get 35 cents a mile for fuel. This is a huge number. I mean, you're
enormous.
leaving 15% of revenue on the road somewhere. You're not even paying attention to it. I literally talked to a customer last week that had 6 months of missing fuel surcharge on like 5 tractors. I'm like, my friend, you're not going to get all this. FedEx is not going to be easy to work with to get paid all this money. So you have to be on it and fix the leak, not just get paid, but you got to stop the leak. The more you bring that to them, the harder it is to get paid. So anyway, that's a great point. I mean, you have to stay on these things every week. Now you talk about weekly, but talk about this monthly budget thing. You have an annual budget and when you do your monthly review, I assume you're kind of doing a budgetary analysis. Tell us about that.
You are. I tell people, look at a budget like a GPS. You get in the car, you put your address in as to where you want to go, and the blue line shows up, right? Well, that's what a budget does. A budget says, okay, where are we right now? Where do you want to go in 12 months from now? And how are you going to get there? That's what a budget does. It literally is a 12-month picture of how you're going to get from A to Z. And like you just said, on a monthly basis, when you're looking at your financial reports, your financial results, it's one thing to see those numbers. It's a whole nother thing to understand, where did you think those numbers were supposed to be?
Yeah.
and did those numbers come in at that, higher than that, lower than that? And that's what a budget will do for you. So one of the things that I really try to get owners to slow down long enough to do is build a budget, not just to what you think the trends are historically, but what do you want those trends to become, right? Are they aligning with what your business objectives are long term? As an example, if you're getting an EBITDA as a percent of revenue, let's say it's at 20%, I'd say you're knocking the cover off the ball in the FedEx world.
Yes.
But if you're coming in there at 2%, how do you know if that's good or bad compared to where, your budget? And if you don't have a budget, you just have no idea how far on or off you are, because you may look at your EBITDA results for the month and get all excited because, one, it's positive, right? Sometimes that's what happens. But that's not really the target that you should be at. If you're at 2% and you want to be at 10% or 15% or 20%, then some things need to change. And the way to do that is really through the budgeting process. The budgeting process will tell you some things you have little control over, such as fuel cost. To some degree, I'd say you because we live in a market environment, driver costs seems to be a fairly narrow control. But when you look at other costs, like what are you paying for a truck? Even on fuel, what fuel contract do you have in place right now with a particular preferred vendor? All of these different things are questions that are going to come out of that budgeting process. Because if you don't like your EBITDA number, then we've got to take a look at our operating expenses and figure out, hey, which one of these can we control? Which ones can we do for cheaper? And then let's set out some initiatives to get that done.
Yeah, there's so much there, Wayne. I mean, knowing what the target ought to be and what the results are, but there's a whole infrastructure that needs to be in place if you want to look at your monthly performance monthly by the 15th. That means you have to actually be doing bookkeeping, and your bookkeeper needs to have closed the month by the 10th so that then your numbers can be applied to a budget and you can have something to look at by the 15th, right? I mean, that requires an internal discipline that's lacking. I joke with contractors all the time. I'm like, so many of you guys are practicing checkbook accounting. If I've got money in the checkbook at the end of the week, it must have been a good week.
Must have been a good week.
And I mean, it's easy to get lulled to sleep when you're getting paid every week, but if that's how you're doing it, you're not going to see those leaks that are eating away at your profit margin. And if you manage that way over a course of years, those leaks get bigger and they change over year, right? You don't see the impact of inflation on your business.
That's right.
If you were to ask me what was the inflation on my business, I could have told you, but it's not going to match necessarily what the government is saying inflation is, because my inflation is different than what they're reporting. It's how it's affecting my business.
And we've certainly seen that in recent years, for FedEx contractors, right? That I remember when COVID hit, what that did to the price of trucks and how it dramatically increased what it cost to get a machine in place just so you could drive a mile. And I can assure you that inflation was far greater than the national inflation, to your point.
We're sure. Tires have doubled since COVID. And now that COVID's gone and things have gone in the other direction, oh, wait a minute. Tractor tire prices didn't change. How does that work? You doubled during COVID and they stay doubled now. Well, and this is how it works, right? Once a price goes up, it doesn't go back. And so
that's right.
You wouldn't even know that if you're not you stroked a check for a set of tires, but what did tires cost you last year? Are we going by muscle memory or are we measuring that? And you mentioned something else. Budget, what should it be? We used to talk about and FedEx is doing this right now in this transition, right? They're booking scheduled improvements on a quarterly basis. This is what they told investors they were going to do, right? So they forecasted in a particular quarter, and we saw it last night. Hey, we're going to do this much in 5 years, and in these consecutive quarters, it's going to be this, and then it's going to get better, and then we're going to gain some steam, and they're going to continue to increase, right? And that's what you mean when you say, what are my improvements? How am I doing on budget? We implemented this change on fuel purchasing or on tire purchasing or on tractor purchasing, and you see a little bit to start, but then you gain steam on it. Talk a little bit about the type of infrastructure that's required to deliver on the budget and the comparison of budget to actual that you're referring to.
Well, it really does start weekly, right? You've got to have the ability to absorb the data that's coming in from your settlement sheets. There's so much information in those settlement sheets that are going to drive not only your financials that you report on monthly, but your KPIs that you report on weekly. And it can be overwhelming because it's like an eye chart, right? That if you look at a printout of your settlement sheet, it can be very daunting for an owner to look at that. But if you've got systems in place that will digest it quickly and then react to it, right? Have your systems not only report out KPIs, but use that same data to pay your people. use that same data to create a baseline for your financials. I think that's what I love about your system, Tim, is that I remember before we knew about your system, I was manually digesting settlement sheets in a spreadsheet. And as you can just guess, fraught with potential errors, right? And still not necessarily picking up everything that's on the settlement sheet that's of value. Whereas what your system's doing is it's going in there, reading literally the entire settlement sheet, and then putting that data in the right bucket so that the system can spit out the reports that the owner needs and spit them out on Wednesday, if I remember correctly.
Wednesday morning, you got your My Ground Force coffee cup, you sit down and your numbers are ready to go. I remember talking with you and you're like, I have a team of folks that are crunching numbers. I'm bringing in meals and we're trying to, by Friday noon, at least have something to look at, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that I've quoted you before without putting your name on it in the past as well, that here's an incredibly skilled man that knows a lot about this business and has an incredible team around him that's supporting him. And he goes through the presentation of his data from our system and he says, well, Tim, I just learned things about my company I didn't know.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think
that was a humble day.
Well, we were really happy that we could do that with you. I'll tell you that because, I really do believe the system adds a lot of value. And if nothing else, it puts time back in the hands of the executive team to then do something with the data, not just generate the data. And the cost of generating that data plummets, right? I mean, the ROI on our software, when you think about how much it costs to get the numbers that we produce, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's exactly right.
So, Wayne, talk to us now. Do you, when you're looking at numbers month over month, and you talked about quarter, in the public world, we always did quarterly numbers, and boy, I remember some of the shenanigans that had to be pulled to make the quarterly numbers look like we needed them to look, and you might rob revenue from next quarter so you can make this quarter look good. And we don't really pay attention to that at the FedEx ground level, contractor level. FedEx pays attention to that, but
right.
But how much time did you spend looking at, say, quarter over quarter trends and seasonal changes and how it looked in Q1 this year versus Q1 of last year? Talk to us a little bit about how that would go.
Yeah, so such a critical piece, right? So you've got the monthly financial reporting, which is just a snapshot of typically the last 30 days. What you really want to do, though, is to see those months, month over month, quarter over quarter, and year over year, where you actually start to see, from a graphic standpoint, what's really going on here, right? It's one thing to see actuals versus budget, and that's critical. That's super important. But to be able to see over the last 12 months what's happened to revenue or what's happened to revenue per mile, right, is critical to running the business. When you look at your labor costs, your non-driver labor cost, is that on a per mile basis, is that going up or is that going down? When you look at it just on monthly, it's really hard to see that. But if you look over a quarter, 3 months worth, or you look over a full year, which is 12 months, now all of a sudden you're seeing, hey, am I winning in this particular area of my overhead or am I getting clobbered, right? And then what do you do with it? You've got to be able to not only see the data, but you've got to be able to react to it. And this is something that can be done. We referenced the idea of this monthly reporting. In the monthly reporting, we look at the month for sure, but we should also be looking at what they call a trailing 12-month view.
Right.
Where you will see what has happened on a monthly basis for the last 12 months. And the beauty of that design is it doesn't take a rocket science to know, is that telling me that I'm doing better or doing worse, right? If it's an expense category and on a per mile basis it's going down, that's a win. And if it's going up, then that's something we need to focus on.
Yes, what you just said is one of the design characteristics of my ground force. All of our dashboards are designed to serve folks like you who are looking for, well, I want to see week over week, then I want to see how that's gone for the past 4 quarters, and then I want to see it by month. I want to see, I got to cut the pie a bunch of different ways to get the level of understanding I need to know which lever to pull. Right, so
Yeah.
you could pull a lever that you think is the right one, but it's not really the right one, and
Right.
you have to look at the data through the Rubik's Cube a few different ways to get the clear view. One of the things I talk about in the profit chain is the Uda Loop. When I was flying, we had the Uda Loop, but it was a little bit different. I call it Uda, UDA, understand, decide, and act. And understanding should take the most of your time. And you should design an infrastructure in your company that helps you gain critical understanding. And what I find is if you really look at data, I know you're like this, I'm like this, you can never give me enough. I'm insatiable when it comes to data. When I look at data, I'm like, well, what about this? And then I go create another metric, right? Well, then, oh no, what about that? And so then you begin to get a complete understanding of your business. And so when it comes time to make decisions, you have way more understanding than might be actually required to make that individual decision. And you're more likely to make the right decision, particularly if you follow a structured approach. One of the things I teach folks is that in the public company world, your decision process is a quality record. It is held, it is maintained, and it is measured. People go back and evaluate, well, okay, well, you said this, and you had this level of understanding, and you said, okay, well, we're going to, and they have your decision. They kept track of it. It's written down in a formal way, and then you're tracked on that decision. And if you would run your FedEx company like that, you would see some serious changes, right? Even if you're the guy making all the decisions, write those decisions down. Under what criteria did you make that decision? And then hold yourself accountable to what you thought and fix what went wrong. This is where you talk about celebrate the wins, but hey, find the faults, because if you don't find them, they perpetuate. They're constantly the stone in the shoe, and you can't figure out why your foot's hurting, right? So you're smiling.
You make me chuckle when you say that, because it's if you don't find those things that are going south, I promise you they'll find you.
And the pain will be at a much higher level of intensity.
Oh yeah, every time.
So Wayne, we're coming to the close of our time, but I don't want to leave out the concept of capital planning. Right? You started our conversation about fleet management, and you've referenced a couple of times the cost of trucks and how much that might have changed over the course of time. And, I really think that capital planning is a bridge too far. Oftentimes, we kind of just think about it as what interest rate am I paying and how much did the truck cost? But it's way more than that. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting business these days, because the cost of what you do with a dollar to create a dollar, right? I mean, that really should be the way we look at this. For every dollar that you put into the company, what dollars can you get out of the company, and how long does it take you to get that dollar out of the company?
Right.
And it's such a critical, it sounds simple. It's not simple to do. And so if you don't have, I keep going back to your systems, Tim, when I think through this, but if you've got someone who's having to buy a truck, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I know if I've got a good deal on the truck? How much cash should I put down on the truck? Should I put any cash down on the truck? What rate should I get? What term should I get? You've got all these questions that most owners really don't understand. It's not even why they got in the business, right? But critical to the success of the business, and critical to your EBITDA measurement, if you think about it. So, yeah, I think the concept of I call it capital preservation.
Yeah, that's a better term for it. Yes.
Right? That you put in all of these tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars into your business. You don't want to see that number go down. And so you've got to have strategies in place. Part of it is from a CapEx standpoint, right? And then part of it is just the weekly or monthly operating results. Both of those have a profound impact on that capital.
And the better you perform on the weekly and monthly cycles, the better you can manage your capital costs, right? So you're generating some free cash flow that now you can make decisions with, and potentially, particularly in a high interest rate environment, manage your debt structure downward, right?
Yeah.
And cost your company less. I remember I went through the dot-com boom and then the dot-com bust, right? So I was there when it went boom. I mean, exploded, and all these companies went out of business. But I saw our quarterly state report when our CFO had used our market position and our huge capital, our appreciation, to go out and get all this corporate. He sold all these bonds, right? And he put all that money in the bank. And then all of a sudden, when our revenue went down 90% year over year, he was looking like the smartest guy I had ever met. I'm like, this dude put hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank because he understood finance.
That's right.
He understood finance. He's like, my company is worth this much. I am going to sell bonds. And he did. And he got the cash, and we survived off of that for like 5 years before the company could recover. I mean, it was a brilliant use of the company's. Of course, the bondholders were not happy, maybe a few years later when the company was not worth nearly what it had been before. But nonetheless, it was a brilliant use of capital planning, right? It's the one that's really stuck with me over the course of time. The other thing, Wayne, and your expertise is clearly, it just comes across, and the fact that you've had, different positions of leadership across your career is an indicator that your skill set is special. I mean, it's not every business owner has this, right? Not every business owner is a CFO. They may have the job as CFO because they don't have anybody else. Their wife might be their CFO because she's doing payroll, or she might be keeping the books. But having a real financial professional ask you hard questions about your business cannot be overestimated in its value. So what does your average, 10 truck company doing $10 million, $2 million, $2.5 million a year? How do they get access to somebody who their accountant can't do it? He doesn't know the business. He's not an expert on it. He doesn't know how to be a CFO. Most accountants are not CFOs, right? That's a whole different skill set. Being an accountant is part of being a CFO, but there's way more to being a CFO than being an accountant. So talk to us a little bit about how your average 10-truck company can, get this kind of coaching.
Well, there's just so many roads that you just opened up.
Yeah, I know. We don't have that much time, Wayne. Pick a dirt road and let's get on it.
One thought, Tim, would be this, that most owners that I talk to are scared to death to talk to banks. And in this interest rate environment, the key to success is having multiple bank relationships. In part because you don't know which one has an attitude to loan you the money on this day. But number two, you also want to keep them honest, right? You don't want them to think that just one bank has got all of your business, right? Again, going back to the relationship with the banker is key. You've got to build that trust with that banker. They don't know your business like you do. And so they're reliant on you. They're reliant on your ability to speak when it's good times, equally so when it's not so good times, right? As long as they know what's going on, you're going to have a solid bank relationship there. Most owners do not have those kind of relationships. You want a strong CFO that actually, as geeky as this sounds, gets excited about having bank relationships out there. I think that's key to the process. Going back on our earlier conversation about capital, one of the things I forgot to mention was this concept of what I call OPLIQ. The acronym is OPLQ, and it's talking about operating liquidity. So if you think about, well, how much cash do I need to have in the bank account? And what I tell owners is that you want to have a minimum in this business of 2 months of cash in the bank at all times. Why? Well, because to your earlier story, right? If things get tough and cash gets hard to get hold of, you want to be able to still run your business. Really well-run companies, that number can go from 2 months to 6 months, if not a year. I've got some that actually have over a year's worth of operating expenses in savings accounts just for that reason.
I always had a personal target in my 2 line haul companies of 6 months. If I didn't have 6 months in the bank, I was nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof all the time. And because it doesn't take much, and that cash starts to disappear, right?
That's right.
And one of the other things I do when guys come into the business, they're so excited. And they're like, wow, I see this company, they're reporting this EBITDA. I'm like, be careful. And then they're like, well, he's doing this much and I can come in and do that much and I'm going to grow it, 5% a year. And I'm like, so all these assumptions sound great and they make you feel good. None of them are true. So let me give you some coaching. It's going to sound ultra conservative, but you'll thank me later.
Yeah.
Cash flow your business at no more than 80% of target revenue.
Yes. Yep.
If you can cash flow at 80% of your target revenue, if you're at target revenue, you're going to be printing money.
That's right.
But
That's
when
exactly
FedEx does the things that they can do and you have no remedy for it, they can cancel your run if they want to. Right. You're not now worried about how you're going to make payments. If you try to figure out if you're going to cash flow your business at 100% of target, you're putting yourself in constant stress.
Yep.
Because I've had this conversation with you. You're like, Tim, I need help understanding where am I leaking miles. Yeah. I'm like, Wayne, you're running, X thousands of miles a week. I'm leaking miles. Where is it?
Yeah.
And so we put that in the system. You can now readily find, you set your target and you can immediately tell week over week, where am I leaking miles? It's such a big deal, right? And if you analyze your business, if you're in multiple domiciles the way you were, the way I was, you can look at your numbers by domicile.
That's right.
How's this business doing? How's that business doing? This business is outperforming on miles, but that business is running half the miles. What's going on over there? So now you know where to go look, right?
Well, that's critical, right? I appreciate you bringing that up, Tim. I think that up to this point, we've really been talking about almost a corporate view.
Yes.
But you're right. You've got a lot of these contractors, they've got these runs that are in different parts of the country. And as we know very well, depending on where that truck starts, it can be a radically different cost structure than in other areas. And so I think this concept of comparing domicile to domicile or region to region is a critically important part. And I would even say it's a gift, because to have internal benchmarks between each other creates a competitive nature that's actually part of winning, right?
Yeah, and to do that manually inside your company, you know how hard that is. But hey, the AI doesn't care how hard it is. It just works it till the problem's solved, right? And so you wake up on Wednesday morning and I think, and I'm going to be a bit self-serving here, but I think the amount of financial data that's available in our system is undervalued. I mean, to be able to really understand your business week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter, truck by truck, region over region, I mean, that is powerful information that if you'll just leverage it to your advantage, even if you don't have a Wayne in your company, you know a lot about what's going on in your business, and you just need to pick a couple things to try to improve on, right?
That's true. And I was sitting here listening to you, and I was like, there's a critical piece here that we need to connect for our listeners. You have this Cadillac version of a data system that spits out reports on a very timely basis. But if nobody's looking at those reports, they're not any good, right? and that's not the systems issue. That's really making it a priority. And I would say that the 1-2 punch that really makes this powerful is when an owner realizes, hey, am I comfortable looking at financials by myself, or do I need help? And be okay to say, hey, I need help for someone else keeping me accountable to this.
Right.
You take that accountability in your system, and I'm pretty certain they're going to do very well.
They're going to be happy with the results. Again, the difference between, I've talked about this before. I did a presentation or a podcast at the end of last year, well, right before the Linehaul Summit, called "Why Do Good Companies Go Bad?" Because I think as a business owner, you can get wrapped up in the chaos of the everyday, right? But you need to pay attention to some other things. So I read this Harvard Business Study, "Why Do Good Companies Go Bad?" written in 1999. And there was a statistic in there that stood out to me. If you look at the Fortune 100 from 1966 and you compare it to the Fortune 100 in 1999, Fortune 100, these are not halfway companies, okay?
That's right.
These are serious. This is FedEx.
Yep.
33 years later, only 19 of them were in the Fortune 100.
Wow.
Woof. If you don't pay attention to the numbers, this is what happens. And look, they were all paying attention to the numbers. They reported numbers every quarter. But what changed for them is they encountered what is called a FedEx Transformation, something like that. And their response to that, and we see this, I think I see it, I'm sure you see it in your conversations with folks, we respond the way that we've always responded.
Yeah.
And we work really hard. There's no lazy people in this business, right? Those guys gone, they don't last very long. The hard workers are still here. No matter what's going on, these people work hard in this FedEx contracting space.
Yeah.
But if you keep doing what you've always done and the market changes, you can work hard right out of business, right? It's called active inertia.
Yeah.
You keep doing the same thing, but you can't move the rock.
That's right.
You got to do something else. And that's what you're talking about, right? Slice this data, figure it out. Okay, I didn't move it that way. What if we did this? What if we did that? What if we changed tire vendors? What if we changed maintenance vendors?
Yep.
What if we told banks, okay, well, I'm going to move some of my operational cash to this other bank. So you're going to start to see a weekly wire transfer of, the money comes in on Monday, some of it's going out on Friday, some of it's going out on Monday. Well, why is that? Well, because I'm enabling this other bank. Okay, well, now I did that. Boy, that unsettled bankers, when you start doing that. I loved that, by the way. I loved unsettling bankers. It's one of my favorite things to do. So, Wayne, we've covered a lot of dirt roads here, and there's miles of dirt roads to go. Man, I really appreciate you being out there again. Wayne's company is Sperova LLC. Look him up. He comes back with there's not a lot of those guys out there, by the way. Sperova is Latin for hope, in case you were wondering why he named it that. What a great name for a guy who can really help you in your business. He's a big believer in my ground force. We loved having him on here today. Folks, if you're not using a great business coach to help you, we can help you with that. Wayne can help you with that. But look, there's enough financial information in my ground force to make you a winner. Pay attention to it. Put in place that discipline that every Wednesday or Thursday, you're going to go through these things. You're going to document what you see. You're going to document your decisions. You're going to decide how to create a budget. We can both help you with that. And start to do the things that make it better for your shareholders. and there's usually only one of you. Make it great for your shareholders. Thanks for joining us today with Wayne. Wayne, thanks for coming back with us. We loved having you, man. I learned a lot in this conversation that I could have used when I was a contractor. I always love talking with you. Folks, thanks for joining us on the Taking Care of Business podcast. We'll see you again soon.